So I went on a prayer walk this morning and ended up back here. I thought this is a really cool place. I gotta do a little devotional out here. So I was praying and thinking about this verse from last night. We talked about it in our high school group, and verse Hebrews 13. It's 10 through 14, and I was feeling like just I'm back here behind our school, behind our church, and the train tracks, and it's a very unfamiliar place, and yet so close to home. Not only where I live, but our church and school. For some of you, where you go to school, and I just thought it's a weird feeling being so close and yet not recognizing anything back here. And it reminded me of this verse that we talked about last night. So Hebrews 13, 10 through 14, it says, "We have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. For we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come." So, a couple things from there. That's neat stuff here. First thing, just Jesus as our sanctifier. He sanctifies the people by his blood. That was his mission. His mission wasn't to build an earthly kingdom, but to be the sacrifice so that our sins could be taken away. As we look forward to Easter, let us just be reminded of that he has sanctified us by his blood. Another thing in this section here is this mention of outside the camp. That in verse 11, the priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. In verse 12, so Jesus also suffered outside the gate. And in verse 13, tells us, therefore, let us go to him outside the camp. And so, for outside the camp, this idea is they would take the animals outside of the camp to sacrifice them. Jesus was taken outside of the city to be the sacrifice. For the readers of the book of Hebrews, this would be outside the camp, meaning separating from the synagogue, the people who sought to kill Jesus and who still practice the law apart from Christ, separating from that. For us, it's separating from the world as we go outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured, as we separate ourselves from the world, from this worldview, secular worldview, from materialism, from desiring to build an earthly kingdom, having the best house, the biggest, best cars, and just all of that stuff. As we separate from that mindset, we will bear reproach, and we will be treated as Christ is treated as we separate from the world. Verse 14 helps us to understand the perspective that we're to have. It says, we are to seek the city that is to come. And this idea is elaborated on in chapter 11, where we're actually given an example of what it looked like to live separated from the world and seeking a city that is to come. Abraham and Sarah are the people that are given as the example. And this is what it says, Hebrews 11, 13 through 16 says, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." So they acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles in the land. They weren't seeking a homeland there, but not an earthly land, but a heavenly one. It says they desired a better country, a heaven country. And there's this promise here at the end, the promise that God has prepared for them a city, which in verse 10, it says, "For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God." And so I was just thinking about these things. A couple things for us to take away from this is that God has prepared a city, a better one than mine, a better city than yours, whose designer is God. And he's prepared it in a country that's better than mine, that's better than yours, heaven country. This is the promise of God and the hope of those who have placed their faith in Jesus, for he suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his blood. The second thing to take away from this is as we become more and more physically separated from our world, our routine, and what we consider normal, it's my hope that our mind will follow suit and we will become more and more separated from the world and the world's way of thinking and the world's secular worldview from materialism, and that we would seek and strive for the city that is to come.